So, welcome everybody. Glad that you could join us tonight. We are coming in live to talk about how to write an op-ed or a letter to the editor. And to give you a sense of why I'm here, about 4 years ago, I was diagnosed with stage 4 cancer. And at the time, Congress was trying to destroy the Affordable Care Act, which was keeping me alive. So I started sharing my story online. And one of my friends was a columnist for US News and World Report. And she suggested to me that I should write an op-ed to share my story and my opinion. And because of her advice and her suggestion, I was able to get that first piece published that spring. And I have been sharing my story for healthcare advocacy ever since. Most recently, I had a piece run in The Nation a week ago about Medicaid expansion. And just this past weekend, I wrote about the Colorado public option for health insurance that ran in a weekly paper in the Metro Denver area. And I want to make sure that everyone watching this knows that your opinion is valuable and you should share it. So consider yourself asked for you too to write an op-ed and share your story. And with that, I'd like to hand it over to our trainers for tonight that will be talking some more about what an op-ed or a letter to the editor is, how you can write one, and where you should go from here. So without further ado, welcome to our trainers.
Welcome, everybody. My name is Norman Stockwell. I'm the publisher of the Progressive magazine. The Progressive is a 112-year-old political magazine based in Madison, Wisconsin, and founded by Senator Robert M. La Follette in the Midwestern progressive tradition of the early 20th century. Our magazine has, since the beginning, stood up for the concerns of everyday working people and against the encroachment of big business into our democracy. Our magazine first championed the need for a national healthcare system in an article in January 1917 by Irving Fisher, who wrote, "At present, the United States has the unenviable distinction of being the only great industrial nation without universal health insurance. Health insurance," he continued, "is like elementary education. To function properly, it must be universal." These are the sorts of voices we have showcased in our pages for more than a century. In 1993, we began a project called the Progressive Media Project, designed to help diversify the pages of our country's newspapers by training and distributing the work of diverse writers on topics of progressive public interest. More about that in a minute. But right now, let me introduce you to our presenters. Bill Leaders is editor of The Progressive. He's the author of An Enemy of the State, the biography of the late editor of The Progressive, Irwin Noll. Leaders was a news editor at Isthmus, Madison's alternative weekly, for 25 years and won dozens of state and national awards. In 2011, he moved to the Wisconsin Center for Investigative Journalism, where he became one of Wisconsin's leading investigative reporters. He joined the staff of The Progressive in 2015 and was named its editor in September of 2018. Cassidy Taralla is our web editor and audience engagement coordinator for The Progressive. She also writes for Lavender Magazine, an LGBTQ publication based in Minneapolis, and the Minnesota Women's Press. She's based in the Twin Cities. And Elizabeth Miller is our office manager and coordinator of Progressive Perspectives, and of our op-ed workshop program. Bill?
Thank you all for joining us. As Norm said, I am the editor of The Progressive, which I like to call the best little political magazine in America, and one that you really should all subscribe to. I'm serious. It's an excellent magazine. It deserves your support. Tomorrow, we're getting the page proofs for our next issue, which is focused on identifying solutions to problems, things like conviction integrity units to root out wrongful criminal convictions, and guaranteed income programs to combat poverty and despair. It's a good issue. If you subscribe now, you'll receive it. You'll be glad you did, I promise. Today, we're going to talk about op-eds and letters to the editor. In my 6 years at the Progressive, I've led dozens of workshops teaching people how to write letters and op-eds. That, in an abbreviated form, is what we're going to do here today. We're going to talk about what makes a good op-ed, what elements are most important, and why communicating through op-eds and letters to the editor is an underutilized opportunity. We're going to show you some prominent examples of op-eds that have appeared in recent years to give you a sense of their potential power. And then we're going to have you do the single most important thing you can do to learn how to write and how to appreciate op-eds. We're going to have you read several of them. Let's start with Elizabeth Miller, the coordinator of our op-ed writing project.
Hello, I'm going to tell you about this in hopes that some of you will be interested in getting involved. In 1993, the Progressive launched the Progressive Media Project, now called Progressive Perspectives, to help diversify and democratize our nation's op-ed pages. We want to empower everyone, including you, to get your story out there. We have a two-pronged approach. We do workshops to teach people how to do their how to write powerful op-eds. Prior to 2020, these were in-person events ranging from 1 hour to all day, depending on the needs of the sponsoring organization. In 2020, in response to the COVID-19 pandemic, we developed a 2-hour online version of the workshop. Going forward, we anticipate a mixture of online and in-person events. Workshop participants learn skills they can use to write an op-ed or letter to the editor that is more likely to be printed in a newspaper or online. In 2020, there were 5 workshops, training a total of 66 participants. You can find information on how to participate in our workshops on our website, progressive.org. Secondly, we publish op-eds on our website. Op-eds reflect the views of the writers, not necessarily those of the Progressive. People are invited to pitch an idea for an op-ed to our editorial staff. You can send your pitch to us at editorial@progressive.org before you write your op-ed. Once we accept an op-ed, we edit it and assist the writer in polishing it. These op-eds are distributed nationally by the Tribune News Service to over 800 print and online media outlets. Last year, 114 writers produced 135 op-eds that collectively were picked up by more than 3,000 media outlets, with a total potential audience of close to 400 million readers. Progressive Perspectives op-eds are picked up by a variety of media outlets across the country, from small town newspapers to large online outlets. Our op-eds are regularly picked up by mainstream news sites, including the Chicago Tribune, New York Newsday, the Los Angeles Times, the Miami Herald, Arcamax, and MSN News. We had some surprises. The statistics I cited earlier are based on information from our clipping service. Occasionally, they're picked up by some outliers that they did not catch. Listen to Workers on Coronavirus by Michael Felsen and Alejandro Zuniga was picked up by the Qatar Tribune. Bill's Progressive Wish List for 2021 appeared on the Korea Times website. We didn't expect that to happen. The op-eds that the Progressive publishes cover a variety of topics, including the environment, healthcare, education, immigration, housing, racism, voting rights, poverty, defense policy, prison reform, animal rights, elections, the COVID-19 pandemic, reproductive rights, agricultural policy, the arts, labor, transportation, policing, economic policy, gun policy, and human rights, including LGBTQ rights and the rights of women, people of color, and the disabled folks. We'll consider a pitch on practically any subject. Our goal is to support voices that are underrepresented in the mainstream media. In 2020, our op-ed writers were about 30% people of color. We have LGBTQ writers and disabled writers. The Progressive is the only national magazine with a regular column by a disabled activist, Mike Irvin. Mike also writes several op-eds a year. We are always seeking to increase the diversity of our op-ed writer pool by welcoming new voices to progressive perspectives.
Thank you, Elizabeth. I'm going to start by asking you a question that I won't be able to hear you answer. What does op-ed stand for? Many people think it stands for opinion editorial. That's what I once thought, but that's not right. Op-ed means opposite the editorial page. The term came into being back in the days when newspapers would devote one page to their own editorials and opinion writers, and then would run letters and other points of view on the opposite page. This origin story is important. From the start, op-ed pages and letters were seen as a forum for a newspaper's readers to say what's on their mind. Essential to the concept of an op-ed, baked into its very name, is the newspaper's sense of obligation to accommodate points of view other than its own. That same sense of obligation is shared by many online publications. They will give you a forum to talk about things that are important to you. All you have to do is write it up. Op-eds are different from editorials in that they come from outside the publication. They're different from letters in that they are longer, maybe 600 words for an op-ed, no more than 200 words for a letter. They are most successful when they draw on the writer's own experience and expertise. They are most likely to be picked up when they tie into issues and developments that are already in the news. Last month, the New York Times decided that it was no longer going to use the term op-eds. It is now calling these guest essays. Kathleen Kingsbury, the paper's opinion editor, said the change was being made because times have changed. There's no geographical ed for op-ed to be opposite to, she wrote in a piece announcing the changes. It's a relic of an older age. Personally, I'm going to keep using the term op-ed until they make me stop. I like that it connects to the past. The op-ed is dead. Long live the op-ed. Op-eds, or whatever you want to call them, are opportunities provided by media outlets to members of the public to share their unique perspective. They are one of the tools that people can employ to, and I'm serious about this, to help change the world. Now I'd like to mention a few somewhat famous op-eds to give you a sense of how these can play into the national dialogue. I'd like to warn people ahead of time, a couple of these examples deal with sexual assault. In 2014, Dylan Farrow, Woody Allen's adoptive daughter, wrote what was called an open letter in the New York Times, alleging that he had sexually assaulted her when she was 7 years old. It began and ended with a question: what's your favorite Woody Allen movie? This was a deeply personal op-ed that challenged readers to rethink their assessment of the famous filmmaker. It was a brave thing to write, as op-eds often are, and it redefined people's perception of Woody Allen, as she intended. In 2018, a person identified as anonymous wrote an op-ed in the Times about the raging dysfunction in the Trump White House. Anonymous said that many Trump appointees were working to thwart the president's more misguided impulses. Anonymous, who also wrote a book using this non-name, was later revealed to be Miles Taylor, then a high-ranking official in the Department of Homeland Security. You should know that anonymity is rarely granted to people who write op-eds and letters to the editor. Here was a case, though, where it was the only way for this information to come out. Last June, Carolyn Randall Williams wrote a stunning op-ed in the New York Times about how she was a descendant of Black slaves who had been raped by their white captors. If there are those who want to remember the legacy of the Confederacy, she wrote, if they want monuments, well then, my body is a monument. My skin is a monument. It was a powerful personal reflection that shocked people into a new understanding of the legacy of slavery. Op-eds can also be noteworthy in how they fail. Last June, US Senator Tom Cotton, a Republican from Arkansas, wrote an op-ed in the Times arguing that the federal government needed to deploy the military to quell Black Lives Matter protests. The piece was so overheated and so unhinged, and the backlash was so strong that the paper's editorial page editor and others involved in the decision to run it were forced to resign. This shows how powerful op-eds can be, and it shows that newspapers seek to serve as gatekeepers. That doesn't mean they publish only op-eds with which they agree, but they do seek to publish only those they can defend. Finally, just last week, Wyoming Congressperson Liz Cheney wrote an op-ed in the Washington Post warning her fellow Republicans that their fealty to Donald Trump was putting our democracy in peril. She noted that the president had already incited one insurrection and could, as she put it, provoke violence again. Cheney will likely be published by other Republicans for her point of view. She'll lose her committee, her status in the party tomorrow, most likely. But she expressed her point of view clearly and urgently, and she helped to frame the parameters of a national debate. Most op-eds, of course, do not become famous, but they can and do make a difference in how people think, and they can accommodate a huge range of topics. To give you a sense of the range of op-eds that we have helped produce, look on our website, www.progressive.org, under op-eds. We're going to scroll a list of some of the op-eds, our most recent offerings. If you can read them, you'll get a sense from the headlines and the subheads of the range of the offerings that we've done just in the last several weeks. This one about don't let the rich avoid taxes did really well. It got picked up all over the country. The piece about teachers continuing to teach outdoors even past the pandemic also did extremely well. There's one on plastic about the danger that it poses environmentally. The promise of public housing and about how that could be a cause for the Biden administration to fund also was a really good piece. That was written by someone from Human Rights Watch, who's one of the groups that we partner with. Tax the wealth to fix the nation's woes was also a very popular piece. That's just a little bit, you can scroll for yourself. You can go much farther down. If I can go through years of those offerings. And I guess the more you read, the more you'll get a sense of the possibilities for the op-eds that you could produce. Continuing on, the most important thing to know about op-eds is that they work. A 2018 study found that reading op-eds changed how people think. One of the study's authors, Alexander Kopak of Yale University, commented that op-eds have a lasting effect on people's views regardless of their political affiliation or their initial stance on an issue. People read an argument and were persuaded by it. It's that simple. Now I'd like to introduce my colleague, Cassidy, to help me go through some of the fundamentals for writing op-eds and letters to the editor. There's 8 of these in all that we will discuss. 1, length matters. The typical op-ed or guest writer column runs about 500 to 600 words. That is not a lot of space. Major newspapers, the New York Times, Washington Post, sometimes accommodate slightly longer pieces, but these are much harder papers to get into. Letters to the editor are usually best if they're about 150 words or less. Many publications will set an upper limit for letters of 200 or 250 words. Check the recommended word length and do not exceed it.
Number 2, write a strong lead, which is the opening sentence. Most editors and readers will only read the first couple of sentences to decide if a piece of writing merits their attention. So the simplicity, strength, and directness of your lead are critical. It should generally be no more than 1 or 2 sentences, which is about 15 to 20 words. And the lead should reveal two things: what your op-ed is about and what is your perspective on it.
3, write about things for which you have relevant experience or expertise. You must convey to the reader why a given issue matters to you and why people should listen to what you have to say about it. Some op-eds will blend personal experience with information on a larger issue. Sometimes you can establish your expertise just by noting what you do, brain surgeon, for instance, to show that this is an issue that you know something about.
4, have a news hook. Most op-eds or letters to the editor need to establish their timeliness by tying it to something that's in the news or something that should be in the news. So something that's happening right now. So you'll want to find the thing that makes your subject relevant, topical, and of interest, like an anniversary, a current event, or a newly emerging issue.
5, include facts, stats, and quotes. If you want to win people over, you have to build a case. No one is going to be impressed by the fact that you have an opinion, even a deeply held one, because we all know people with deeply held opinions who are wrong. What matters is the information and the arguments that you present. Use other people's quotes if they help make your point. Cite studies and statistics to back up what you say.
And 6, keep it simple. So avoid jargon, the overuse of numbers, anything that would cause readers to stop and try to figure out what you're trying to say. They're likely to just stop reading altogether at that point. So it's best to have someone else read what you have written. And if they say that something doesn't make sense to them or that they found something confusing, you'll want to take that seriously because chances are that other readers will feel the same.
7, make sure it's accurate. Check every spelling and every fact in what you write. Check the things you're sure about. Include links to substantiating sources to back up what you say.
And lastly, number 8, craft a simple but satisfying conclusion. So we like to think about this as putting a bow on it. So you'll wrap up the threads of your argument and say very clearly what you want the readers to have as their takeaway. So you'll end on a note that makes the reader feel good about agreeing with you. So now we're going to take a look at 3 op-eds that we've published through our Progressive Perspectives project. This first one here is Make Dental Care a Healthcare Benefit, which is by Jess Pernsteiner, the Progressive's former op-ed project coordinator. And this was published in late 2019. If you're on a mobile device reading this, you can go to a different web browser and look it up at progressive.org/dental to see it more clearly. So we'll take about 2 minutes to read this piece then.
About 30 seconds, yeah.
All right, that was about 2 minutes. Hopefully you had a chance to read the entire piece. So this is a good example of an op-ed that blends the personal with a larger issue. The writer starts off talking about her own experience, including that her dental fixes are costing a month's pay, even though she does have dental insurance. She cites an authoritative book, Teeth, and a Mayo Clinic report, as well as a National Association of Dental Plan statistic. She goes back and forth between her personal experience and the larger issue, including a really interesting historical backstory. So the piece doesn't bog down in the personal or the statistical, and there's a nice concluding line that clearly states positive aspiration, which is, we must do all we can to include dental care as a healthcare benefit to protect and improve the health and lives of all Americans.
Laura Packard's op-ed last week in The Nation, which you should all read, takes an approach that is similar to this op-ed. It goes back and forth between the personal and the political regarding Medicare expansion under the Affordable Care Act. Laura's personal experience makes her political points more persuasive. The second op-ed that we're going to have you read is Don't Let Hospital CEOs Shut Down Care by Philippa Rizopoulos, a One World Fund Fellow at Partners for Dignity and Rights. This was published not long ago in March. If you are on a mobile device, you can read this op-ed at progressive.org/CEO. Give you 2 minutes to read this and talk to you on the other side. About 30 seconds yet. Okay, this op-ed opens with a news hook about something that just happened in the Biden administration, a proposed increase in subsidies under the Affordable Care Act. This establishes the piece's timeliness and relevance. Early on, the writer zeroes in on a killer statistic. In 2018, the US hospital industry made $81 billion, while Americans borrowed $88 billion to pay for their medical expenses. The writer talks about a hospital chain that has $2 billion in assets and still took government aid during the pandemic. She provides stats on hospital shutdowns and gives a specific example of a shutdown and how it impacted a community, the Austria Regional Medical Center in Yakima, Washington. She chides political leaders for letting for-profit corporations base these life-saving decisions on where they can make the most money. Her conclusion is concise. Healthcare is a human right, not an opportunity for private profit.
And with this piece, note that the writer does not bring in her own personal experience and instead makes a demonstration of her expertise. So you don't always have to write yourself into the piece. Sometimes all it takes is to assume the mantle of an expert. So then we'll just look at one more here. The Long, Ugly History of Bathroom Segregation by Elizabeth Thompson, who has since changed her name to Kiki Monifa. She's a longtime contributor of op-eds to The Progressive and lives in Oakland, California. And this piece was published in 2016. So if you're on a mobile device, you can read this one at progressive.org/bathroom. And this one's a pretty quick read, so we'll just take 1 minute for this one. Okay, so the writer starts off this piece by telling a personal story of bathroom discrimination and then makes the case that the current wave of bathroom bills regarding transgender people is just as pernicious. So she makes a couple of jokes like, by the way, I don't carry my birth certificate with me when I use a public restroom. Do you? And I don't care which bathroom you use, just wash your hands. She also quotes Attorney General Loretta Lynch making a historically important statement about protecting transgender people. And then she works in a great line that drives home the point of the piece. It's about recognizing our humanness and not otherness. And she has a great final line. Here's hoping that laws permitting discrimination in bathrooms and beyond be repealed, both as a matter of law and in people's hearts and minds.
This is one of my favorite op-eds, also one of our best read op-eds. Even now, 5 years after it was written, it still gets hundreds of views on our website each week. It establishes a connection with readers by being funny and disarming, makes great points, and it succeeds in making the reader feel good about agreeing with the perspective of the writer. I think, as said before, that writing like this can change the world. Now I'd like to talk just a bit about letters to the editor as distinct from op-eds. Here are a few things you should know. A letter to the editor is a free way to get your opinions and information printed in the editorial page of a newspaper or online. Letters tend to be among the most highly read parts of the paper. Writing letters is a good way to keep the focus on issues you care about. They are a way to tout ideas and political candidates, especially at the local level. Letters can raise the visibility of an issue and help others to see it your way. Letters to the editor are often a response to the paper's coverage or lack of coverage of a given topic. Some letters are critical, some complimentary. Most media outlets recognize a special responsibility to accommodate letters that respond to things they have published. And that creates a built-in opportunity for you. Frame what you have to say as a response to something that has already been published, and you will increase the chances of having your letter used. Newspaper editors will favor letters written by people who live in the community that the newspaper serves. They will give preference to letters about local issues. They want letters from a single person, maybe two people, not from a group of people. If you are writing on a topic for which you have unique experience or expertise, be sure to mention this. If you are writing as a representative of a group, company, or institution, make this clear, either in the text of the letter or in an identifier after your name. Many papers have policies restricting how often they will run letters from the same person, for instance, no more than one every 30 days. Prolific letter writers learn to submit to a variety of outlets. When you submit a letter to the editor or an op-ed, it's best to offer it exclusively. If you do send it to more than one outlet, let them know it is a multiple submission. Finally, the editorial staff has the right to edit your letter for clarity or space, so don't be surprised when this happens. Expect that it will do a competent job.
Now we're going to take some questions that were submitted by some of our listeners. Starting off with, how long should a letter to the editor be? How long should an op-ed be? And what if yours is really short? Is there such a thing as being too short?
Letters should be no more than 200 words, op-eds no more than 600. A letter cannot be too short. In fact, very short letters are more likely to be used. Be aware, though, that it may be hard to place a piece of writing that is in the 300 to 400 word range. That's too long for a letter, too short for an op-ed. Some outlets will find a way to use these, but you can't count on it.
Second question, if you're trying to get your piece published in a paper that is new to you, is it better to use their generic online submission form if they have one, or to figure out which specific editor covers healthcare or your topic of interest and contact them directly?
Yeah, so you'll want to use the online portal that the publication recommends, but for smaller publications, you might want to send it directly to the letters editor or the opinion page editor. There's no need to address it to the reporter for whoever's beat that is, but you may want to share the submitted letter with the reporter whose work that you are responding to.
Okay. Is it better to try and introduce yourself to an editor before you have a piece, or only when you have something to pitch?
For letters, you should just send. For an op-ed, you may want to contact the news outlet in advance, asking if it might be interested. Editors who agree to take a look may become a little bit more invested in a piece and thus more likely to use it. It's great if you can establish a relationship with the people who run what you write. A good way to do this is to send them a thank you email after your letter or op-ed appears.
What do you do if you submit a time-sensitive piece and you hear nothing? How long should you give the outlet before you email them again? And what's the line between being persistent and ruining any chance of a future relationship?
So let the editor know that it's something that's time sensitive and ask them for a prompt response. We would also follow up with them then the next day. There's nothing wrong with being persistent, but editors do like when you're polite.
If you've pitched an editor again and again over time and never hear anything back, should you give up and just write off that particular publication?
Yeah, probably. It's hard to take no for an answer, but it's much harder to be ignored. Don't take it personally, but yes, you may want to move on to other outlets, maybe ones that are more local. And remember the trick about framing what you have to say as a response to something that the outlet has already published.
How much of an op-ed should be about your personal story versus issue background versus your call to action? And is it good or bad to have a clear call to action in your piece?
That's a great question. So it's okay to have a call to action in your piece. If you have a personal story to tell, you can weave that into a discussion of a larger issue. The personal component that establishes your expertise doesn't have to be as in-depth as the discussion. It could be like something as simple as a nurse practitioner for more than 20 years, I have seen firsthand the deficiencies of our healthcare system.
And finally, how do you find the right home for your letters and op-eds? When do you aim for a national outlet and when do you go local?
Well, your best chance of getting published is local. Editors especially want to accommodate points of view from among their own readers and within the communities that they serve. National publications are much harder to break into. Sometimes it's worth a try. One thing you can do is subscribe to the Progressive magazine and write us a letter to the editor. If it's in response to something that we've published, we're very likely to use it. And then you can tell people you've been published in the Progressive. That's our show. Thank you for listening. Here's Norm again.
Thanks, everybody, very much for joining us today. This gives you just a little sample of the training workshops that we do. They usually are a couple hours long and have a lot more detail and a lot of chances to practice and hone your writing skills. In addition to the workshop experience, we also follow up with all of our participants to help them create and publish their op-ed. If you're interested in more information about the workshops, or if you want to read some of the op-eds we've published over the years, please visit our website, progressive.org, and click on the op-eds tab. And while you're there, you can also sign up to receive our free weekly email newsletters, which highlight stories in the magazine and on the website. And you can also subscribe to The Progressive by going to progressive.org/subscribe. You won't be sorry that you did.
Thank you, everybody. Thank you to our presenters and everyone that spent your time with us. I know that everyone watching this has an important personal story, and I hope you take the opportunity to write a letter to the editor or an op-ed to tell it. And if you would like to sign up for more information about future trainings, you can go to bit.ly/healthcare voices. And again, I look forward to seeing your op-eds in the future. And this program will be available online. If you missed part of it or want to watch it again, it will be saved and it will be available on Facebook and YouTube and wherever you get your training needs. Thank you again.